my job as a futurist is really to get people to think about the future. And one of the ways that I was able to do that was I started an online magazine called Serious Wonder. Serious Wonder is made up of a group of futurists, transhumanists, techno-philosophers, and tech geeks, really. And we are really interested in the relationships between consciousness, technology, and the future. I like to think of Serious Wonder as a sort of philosophical playground for people to use their thoughts and their minds to move us into the future. A space, really, for the unconscious future to become conscious. Albert Einstein said that the separation between the past, present, and future is only an illusion, although a convincing one. And if we're going to talk about the future, the first thing we have to talk about is the perception of time. There was an interesting study that just came out in the Journal of Animal Behavior that said that smaller species of animals actually perceive time in slow motion. So what does this say about our perception of time? What does it say about our perceived perceptions of each other's times? I think if we look at one of the metaphors that I like to use called digital mirror, this is a fascinating idea. So when we talk about digital mirror, every phone, every smartwatch, every Google Glass, and every drone that we see coming out in the technology field is a part of this digital mirror. The digital mirror is the unconscious future becoming conscious. The real question is, are we happy with what we see? This is a really beautiful shot. I don't know if you guys saw this in the news. This is the Saturn hexagon. I don't know how many of you saw this. But this is actually a real picture. I didn't make this up. This isn't Photoshop. And this is something that I've been talking about on Serious Wonder quite a bit, that technology is actually a natural byproduct of the universe. The geometry, the numbers, the math, this was here before any human ever walked on this planet. And so when we look at the relationship between human consciousness and technology, there is an illusion that there is no separation. The technology is a part of us. This thinking of this separation that we have between human consciousness and technology is what I've been calling the digital hallucination. The idea that we could separate ourselves from this technology and where it's going. And when we talk later in this, I'm going to show you some slides of androids, humanoids, and that sort of thing. What's amazing is that this is where consciousness is going. This is where technology is going. The technology is merging with our consciousness. One of the main things that futurists do are, we actually look for pattern recognition, whether it's behavioral patterns, whether it's psychological patterns, cultural patterns. Pattern recognition is one of the main ways that we're able to look out into the culture, look into the technology, and say, this is where we may be going. I'm not necessarily a fan of making strict predictions, so you're not going to pin me down by saying, well, what year are we going to have artificial intelligence? What I can say to you is that if you study human behavior, it will be able to tell you how we develop as a technological civilization. And I'll just give you a quick example. I said, actually I think it was one of the speeches that I made, Julian was at this speech, and I said that in 10 years, we're not gonna have phones. And of course people were like, what are you talking about? Because we're going through this huge mobile revolution. But the fact is that is not the behavior that we've had for millions of years on this planet. For millions of years, we have been looking along the horizon. We have kept our heads up. And so this is why you're seeing Google Glass, whether you like it or not, because there have been detractors. This is why we're seeing this. We're starting to see wearable technologies. You're going to start wearing your computers on your body. There was something, I was actually thinking of this for Serious Wonder recently, and this is something for you guys to think about. I can imagine in the next 10 years where you will be wearing a computerized bodysuit or a jacket, and can you imagine walking around and your social network is actually being displayed on your jacket to other people so they can see it? This is where we're going. So it's a fascinating thing. So when we talk about pattern recognition, this is what we're talking about. Now I want to take you on a quick future history tour. These are some of the people that have really influenced me, and the first one is H.G. Wells. In 1902, H.G. Wells wrote a book called The Discovery of the Future, and in this book, Wells described two specific mindsets. And we all know people like this if you think about it. You may be one of these types, of course. The first mindset is the passive mindset. The passive mindset is interested in the past. We live this way because this is what's happened to us. The active mindset is concerned with the future. We live this way because we just haven't found a new way of living, or we haven't invented a new way of living. So H.G. Wells has been a huge influence for me as a futurist. We have Arthur C. Clarke, who I'm sure all of you have seen 2001: A Space Odyssey. And in this movie, I watched it recently, and I thought, the moment when the primates start sort of rubbing the monolith, that's where we are right now. We are still infants in this technological revolution. And so even though there are detractors and people who are against futurism and against technology, I think it's important to remember that we are infants right now in this movement. We have Isaac Asimov, who talked about the three laws of robotics and asked, what will life be like when we have artificial intelligent robots in our lives every single day? We have Kevin Kelly, who is the editor at Wired Magazine, who asked, I think, one of the most important questions of our time: what does technology want? I've thought about this question a lot since I read his book, and the answer that keeps coming to me, I think technology wants to become conscious, and I think that's where it's headed. And if Ray Kurzweil, who is the next person that's sort of been a big influence, who is Google's futurist now, if he has anything to do with this, technology will become conscious. Ray has written extensively on the idea of the technological singularity, which is the moment where artificial intelligence becomes greater than human intelligence and may, in fact, take over the world. Then we have somebody that a lot of you may have never heard of. His name is Nick Bostrom, and he's an Oxford philosopher. And Nick came up with a really fascinating theory that we may be living in a simulated universe. Now, this is really far down the rabbit hole, so go back to your drinking if you're not interested in this. But what's so fascinating about his theory is what he's saying is that if technology has happened here on this planet, more than likely, because our universe is so huge, it's happened somewhere else before. And if that's the case, a more advanced intelligent civilization may have decided that it wanted to create what he's calling an ancestor simulation. And in fact, there is some proof in string theory and codes that we're finding in string theory that this may in fact be true. Is that depressing? I don't know. We have to talk about that. So now I want to do a sort of rapid fire through the history of futurism so that we can see what I'm talking about in detail. This is an image from 1957, and the thing that's so fascinating about this, two things. The ad itself, I don't know if you can read that underneath it, but it says, electric cars will be driving themselves. That's the gist of this ad. And of course we know that now, because of Elon Musk and Tesla Motors, and because of Google driverless cars, we have this technology. Took a while, but we have it. The next thing I thought was really brilliant was this ad for, I think it was this 1956, for moving sidewalks. We've all seen this in airports. So that's just another example of how futurism has evolved. And of course, this image is so interesting to me because, first of all, of course this is the primary stage of Skype, right? This is what Skype was thinking about when they created it. But the fascinating thing about this is that he's holding a rotary phone. And the contrast just I thought was really interesting. Now we're moving into what's going on right now. The things I'm showing you are happening as we speak. In Singapore, in Tokyo, in Chicago, in cities around the world, and soon to be in New York City, in Manhattan, we will see vertical farms. And whether that's skyscrapers, that's yet to be determined, but you will see vertical farms, and we are seeing them around the world. This is an interesting concept called a water scraper. And I don't know if I feel comfortable living 30 stories underwater, but maybe. In vitro meat, I'm sorry if you guys are eating. Somebody's gagging over here, but you know, this is the thing, right? So in vitro meat is obviously meat that's been grown in the laboratory. On one hand, I feel that this could be a great thing because it could end the suffering of animals being produced for our protein. It could feed people around the world. On the other hand, I agree, it's kind of gross. So, this is a company called Festo, and I love this company. This is a brilliant company. They release robots every year, and really brilliant robots. They've done flying stingrays, they've done jellyfish, flying birds. I think you guys may have seen it at the TED conference. They showed it at the TED conference. So aquabots, right? So we're going to have robots in our oceans, and we may hear actually about this later tonight. Bionic eyes. We're going to have bionic hearing. These are things that are happening right now. This goes into the wearable technology field. We are going to start incorporating our technology into our bodies. And before you say that this is frightening, how many of you would deny yourself a pacemaker if you needed it? Now we have sex bots. You know I had to talk about it, right? I mean, so I just want to read this quickly to you. So it says, Robots, Men, and Sex Tourism report published in the journal Futurist said that robot prostitutes will completely revolutionize the sex tourism industry. Wasn't familiar there was a sex tourism industry, but by 2050, I actually think it's going to be sooner than 2050. And the reason I say that is because already right now in the market we have 3 commercially available sex bots. These are sex dolls that have actuators and can move, and I'll let you sort of imagine that. So we also have, this is really brilliant, 3D bioprinting. And the thing that makes this so important, and this is happening now, is that you could take your stem cells and 3D print a heart, a liver, lungs, not a brain yet, we're not that advanced. But you could store this, and I do think we'll see this in the future. You can store these organs in a factory so that if you're in a car accident, if you have heart failure, you can harvest those from the factory and use them within 24 hours. And of course, you won't have to be on anti-rejection medication for the rest of your life. This leads us into the field of longevity in the futurist field and gets into the idea of transhumanism. A friend of mine, Zoltan Istvan, actually wrote an article recently for Huffington Post where he presented the idea, when do we have the first transhuman Olympics? It's a valid question because we know, athletes are being caught using drugs. And so when do we allow humans to experiment and see how far they can actually go with their bodies? And this is part of the transhumanist movement. And of course, the last slide is what you've all been waiting for, the flying car. It doesn't matter what I tell people. I can go on about 3D bioprinting. The first thing they say to me, yeah, but what about my flying car? Well, this is 1947, and this is not the flying car that we're looking for, I can tell you. What I can tell you is that lighter than air floating transportation is where we're going. The way this is going to work is we're going to have compressed helium. We're going to use metallic microlattice. This is actually the lightest material structure in the world. And I'm just telling you right now, that image, the guy that took this image is going to be so famous and when it goes down in history. But Boeing and General Motors owns the laboratory that did this, so you can imagine where this is going to go. We're going to be making planes out of this. We're going to be making individual transportation that is lighter than air. That is a little bit of a misnomer. It's not actually lighter than air, but the materials are light enough that if we use compressed helium, we could have vertical lift and use solar power to basically have your floating car finally. So I just wanted to, and also this product, Airloy, is part of this as well that we could use to build the lighter than air. So thank you so much. If we have time for questions, I'll take a few questions.